Hi, this is Joey. Welcome to Cinema Studies. Today, we're going to be talking about
the Canon C100.
The C100 is the working class hero of Canon's C series cameras. It doesn't do anything flashy, but what it does do, it tackles with aplomb. Cinema cameras are optimized for filmmaking, so unlike a lot of DSLRs, which can bury the features that are most important to a filmmaker inside of dense menus, the C100 brings all of the tools of filmmaking up front, often right on the body of the camera itself. This video is a guide to get you going with this camera, and we'll cover the following very basic but very important topics: powering the camera, black balance, formatting, video settings, white balance, exposure, audio settings, and in-camera tools. Before we dive in, know the model of camera of which you're in possession. Some of these topics will be different depending on whether you have the first generation C100 or the Mark II. There are a number of tells, but the biggest are the differences in display. The first gen optical is fixed, whereas the Mark II articulates. Also, the Mark II OLED screen flips out and provides you with a myriad of positions, including one that can face the subject, whereas the first gen LCD flips up and spins 180 degrees before moving into its only working position. Know which model of camera you have. It will be especially important when we get to the settings. You'll see that the C100 is littered with numbered buttons. They're numbered because you can custom map each of these buttons to a different tool, but Canon did a pretty good job of anticipating what tools would be most useful to you as a filmmaker. So for the purposes of this video, we'll assume you're using the camera's default factory settings. We won't be discussing the basics of camera and lens mounting. Those are general topics addressed in another video. Everything here is exclusive to the C100's operation, starting with you have the option of powering the C100 with an AC adapter. The port for this adapter can be found behind, if you're facing the rear of the camera, the lower right door. But the C100 excels as a field camera, which means you're probably going to be using the battery. The camera's BP battery itself takes about 3 hours and 20 minutes to charge from 0 to full, and even if you're using the camera's most demanding settings, you'll get at least 3 hours of continuous recording time in a single charge. The batteries also have a button on the back with an LED indicator to let you know how much of a charge your battery has. To attach it, insert the battery along the right side of the compartment and gently slide it to the left. It will make a satisfying click to let you know it's secure in the cradle. If you're using the first generation C100, the battery release switch will be on the right side of the camera. Push it forward while simultaneously sliding the battery to the right. If you're using the Mark II, the battery release isn't a switch but a button, and it's located right next to the battery cradle. Push it in, and while it's depressed, slide the battery to the right. You'll notice I haven't mounted a lens on this camera yet because the next thing we're going to do is address something you should do before your physical setup is complete. Black balance, or black calibration, is something you'll want to do before you mount the lens with the sensor cap in place. This is a feature that is unique to the C-series cameras, so if you've used other Canon DSLRs, this may be new to your setup workflow, but I strongly recommend including it. By setting the black balance, you're telling the camera's sensor what black looks like. This will provide you with a cleaner image with less noise in the darker areas of your frame, especially if you're shooting in log. This is Marty McFly. He's a very good dog, but he's also a very black dog. On the left, you see Marty without the black balance configured. On the right is the same shot with the same lighting and settings, only with the black balance set, and you can see that Marty's fur has a richer, deeper color. You can do this too, but you'll have to provide your own dog. Here's how. First, make sure you're starting without a lens attached and with the sensor cap screwed into place. Next, turn the power switch to the camera position. Then, press the menu button and use the thumb joystick to navigate to the camera icon. If this is your first time navigating the menu on the C100, note that the joystick itself is a button, and you can press it in to select whatever it is you have highlighted. On the first gen, the joystick is on the hand grip. On the Mark II, there are two joysticks, one on the hand grip and another below the display. With the camera icon selected, press the joystick to activate that menu. Navigate down or up, the menu cycles in a loop, until you land on ABB. ABB here stands for Auto Black Balance. Press the joystick to select ABB, and the camera will ask you to confirm that the body cap is covering the sensor. It is, and so we will use the joystick to select OK, and we're off. Let's see how long it takes. And that's it. Your camera is now calibrated to recognize what black looks like. If you go through this process every time your lighting or color temperature changes, you will have cleaner footage that will be more malleable in post. The first thing you'll want to do once your camera is set up and running is to format your SD cards. Remember that SD cards are designed for capture, not long-term storage, so before you start shooting, make sure you have a plan for the footage you're about to collect. Make sure you're using an SD card that is fast enough to keep up with the rate of data output by the camera's recording process. We'll address SD cards more in depth in a different video, but if you're purchasing something and you want to make sure it's compatible with this camera, use the manufacturer's recommendations. On the rear of the camera, you'll see there are two slots labeled A and B. With the door open, gently press the card face up in either slot until it clicks into place and then close the card slot door. Make sure you close this door or the cards will not read. From there, press the menu button. Use the joystick to select the wrench icon and navigate down or up to Initialize Media. Press the joystick to select the slot that contains the card you want to format, and then select either Complete or Quick. Complete takes maybe 10 seconds, so I wilt to even imagine the kind of pressure you must be under to use Quick. We'll just use Complete. You'll notice that a warning comes up, which is a way to remind you that when you format the card, any media on that card will be erased. Again, SD cards are not for storage. So long as you have moved your media to a drive, this shouldn't be a concern. When you select OK and the process completes, you will have a clean SD card. Now you probably noticed that you can put two cards into this camera. You can do what's called relay recording, which is when the camera will immediately start recording to the second card once the first is full, or you can perform double slot recording, which is when you record the same footage to two different cards. To access this option, go to the menu, navigate to the wrench menu, and scroll down to where you can see relay recording right on top of double slot recording. You can only have one of them on, so select what is best for your circumstances. The C100 has a file size maximum of 4.17 gigabytes. The camera won't stop recording once your file size hits that limit. It will just start writing a second file once the first is full. In post, you just have to butt the second file up against the first. You won't lose a frame, and the playback will be continuous and uninterrupted. You may experience a bump in audio, so know that if you're planning on recording audio in camera. More on that later. You're almost to the part where you can begin using this tool to make some art. But first, there are a lot of options on this camera, and you should get familiar with the menu to see what might be appropriate for your circumstances. But the settings that we're going to focus on just to get you going are going to be system frequency, file format, bit depth, frame rate, and we'll also talk about recording and log, which is not necessary, but you might want to know it. This all takes place inside the menu, so let's dive in. We'll start with system frequency because that will determine your other settings. In the menu, navigate down to the wrench and then scroll to System Frequency. What you select will be determined by where you're shooting. If you're in North America, Japan, South Korea, or any country that uses the NTSC standard, go with 59.94 Hertz. If you're in Europe, countries in Asia heretofore unmentioned, or any country that uses the PAL standard, use 50 Hertz. We're going to talk about file format, bitrate, and frame rate next, but this is where things really diverge between the first model and the Mark II. These settings also relate to one another, so we'll tackle all three one model at a time. If you're using the first gen C100, you have one file format option, which is AVCHD. To set the bitrate, go to the wrench menu and scroll down to bitrate. Opening this menu will give you your bitrate options. The higher the number, the better quality media you're going to have on the back end, and the bigger file you're going to create when you record. I recommend sticking with 24. The difference between 24 megabits per second and 24 LPCM is that you may want to use LPCM if you're recording audio in camera, which we'll talk about later. Let's move on to frame rate. The options you're presented with can get confusing, and the explanations are beyond the purview of this video and in all likelihood will at some point in the near future be obsolete, so we'll keep this simple. The C100 gives you 4 options. The first 3 are interlaced frame rates, which are used for broadcast. The last one, 24p, is more appropriate for filmmaking, so use that. That's how you set the file format, bitrate, and frame rate of the first gen C100. Now let's talk about the Mark II. With the Mark II, you have a choice with file format. In the wrench menu right below the system frequency is movie format, where you can choose either AVCHD or MP4. MP4 is portable and easier to work with, but you get better media quality with AVCHD if you shoot at the same bitrate. However, in MP4, you can actually shoot at a higher bitrate and get a slightly better image. There is a teeny tiny catch here, though, which is that you're going to be locked to a higher frame rate. I'll explain how this works. To set the bitrate and the frame rate, you have to go into the menu below Movie Format that corresponds to the format you've selected. So if you've selected AVCHD as your format, go into the AVCHD menu. If you've selected MP4, go into the MP4 menu. Your bitrate options will be different depending on if you're using AVCHD or MP4. As with the first gen, the higher AVCHD bitrates give you the LPCM option, which again is something to consider if you're recording audio in camera. As with the first gen, selecting a bitrate of 24 will give you a few frame rate options, and as with the first gen, you should ignore the interlaced options and go with the last one at 23.98p or 24 drop frame if you prefer. With the Mark II, in the AVCHD format, you can go up to 28 megabits per second. That said, if you choose a frame rate higher than 24, note that you will be locked to an FPS of 60 drop frame. In MP4, selecting any bitrate under 35 will enable you to choose an FPS of either 30 or 24 drop frame with none of the interlaced options that you find in AVCHD, which you probably didn't want anyway. In MP4, your bitrate can go as high as 35, but again, you'll be locked at 60 drop frame. The same holds true if you've set the frequency to 50 Hz, but instead of 60 drop frame, you'll be locked to a true frame rate of 50. To recap, with regard to file format, bitrate, and frame rate, what you choose in these settings is circumstance dependent and will be different depending on camera model. If you're using the first gen, choose the bitrate of 24 LPCM if you're recording audio in camera, and set your frame rate to 24p. If you are using the Mark II, decide first if you're recording in MP4 or AVCHD. Use MP4 if you are not recording audio in camera and you are okay working with 60 frames per second. Use AVCHD if you want quality in-camera audio, understanding that your maximum bitrate won't be as high as MP4. There are a lot more settings in these menus, and I encourage you to play with them and see what they do. The ones we discussed are the ones you have to consider. Before we move on, there is one more setting that you don't have to consider, but you may want to. That is the decision to shoot logarithmically. Logarithmic footage, or log for short, I don't know anybody who calls it logarithmic, looks ashy and washed out with very little color definition. It's like somebody left it out in the sun too long. It's a flat picture profile that frankly looks terrible. Why would I want to use this terrible profile? You are surely asking yourself quietly, or I don't know, maybe out loud, you do you. Why? Because the footage itself actually contains a lot more color information than its standard counterpart. You just have to be willing to take the time to color grade your video in post. That is, shooting in log means that you have to color grade your video. But when you do, it's going to have a lot more color depth on the back end. You just have to be prepared to do that work in post. To activate the log picture profile, open the menu and navigate to the camera icon. From there, scroll down to CP Cinema Locked, switch this from off to on, and voila! You are now shooting logarithmically. To give you a head start on color grading, you can use the manufacturer-provided LUTs. They're free to download on Canon's website, but it's a bit confusing because you get so many in a single download. Just know that for the Canon C100, you should use only the C-Log1 LUTs. Now that you've got all of your preset things out of the way, let's look at the things you'll be adjusting on set or on location, starting with... For the sake of demonstration, today's sample subject will be a cardboard cutout of Judy Garland. When you are setting white balance, you are telling your camera what white looks like. When you do, the color temperature of the entire picture will adjust accordingly. Setting your color temperature is one of the first things you should do once your scene is lit, and there are a few ways to do it, so let's look at what might work best for you. You can set your white balance by either hitting the WB button on the side of the camera or by pressing in the joystick and then ticking left or right until the icon that is just above the f-stop is highlighted. The specific icon that is selected will determine how you are setting your color temperature. Your first option is to use the auto white balance setting. Do not use that. Do not use that. If the color temperature in your scene changes in the middle of a shot and your camera adjusts, it will ruin your shot. Do not. Let's consider the other usable options, starting with the indexed settings. This one is barely usable. The index options aren't great on the C100. You only have two, sunlight and incandescent. There are chasms of variance on either side of those settings. You can do better. The third option is to create a preset. This will be accurate, but it is a little more time-consuming. To do this, set a white card in front of the camera in your chosen lighting setup and either move your camera so that the white fills the screen or just zoom in if you're using a zoom lens. Highlight white balance on your screen and cycle until you get this symbol followed by either an A or a B, and make sure the icon is flashing. Next, hold the button on the side of the camera labeled with the same symbol while you have the white card filling the entire screen. When the preset icon, A or B, stops flashing, your temperature will be set and you'll be able to go back to that temperature by just selecting the A or B preset. Lastly, and optimally, you can just manually set the white balance, which, if you understand the color temperature scale, is just as accurate as the previous method and a lot faster. To do this, cycle through the WB options until you see the K icon. K here means Kelvin, which is the unit of measurement used in determining color temperature. Move the joystick up or down to raise and lower the temperature, which is the number beside the K, to match your lighting situation. And that's it. Remember that the temperature you're setting is the temperature of the light, not the color that you want to use to offset that light. So for example, if you're shooting on a sunny day with a lot of blue in your shot, setting the temperature to 8,000 won't make your picture more blue, it will make it more amber in order to balance the blue. If what I said makes no sense to you, take a few minutes to learn about the Kelvin scale. It is well worth your time. For the purposes of this video, we are going to move on to let's look at the camera's display. You can see a meter at the bottom. This is an exposure meter. Keeping that indicator hovering around the middle will ensure that your image is well exposed but not blown out. As with almost every camera since the dawn of photography, there are three ways to adjust exposure: shutter speed or shutter angle, ISO, and aperture or f-stop or iris. We'll start with shutter. Your experience here will depend on whether you're measuring shutter through speed, which is a ratio, or angle, which is a number in degrees. You can select either speed or angle by going into the menu, selecting the camera icon, scrolling down to shutter, selecting mode, and then choosing either speed or angle. A faster shutter speed will diminish exposure but capture more detail in moving subjects, whereas a slower speed will add blur to your moving subjects but improve overall exposure. Which is best for you is a matter of choice, but your baseline shutter speed should be half of your frame rate. So if your camera is set to record at 24 frames per second, your shutter speed should be set at 1/48th of a second. If you're using angle, your baseline should be 180 degrees. To set this, press button 14, labeled shuttered, on the left of the camera body, or just press in the joystick and then move the joystick left or right until the shutter is selected. Then from there, move the joystick up or down to raise and lower the shutter by either speed or angle, whichever you selected. Now let's look at ISO. You can set the ISO by either pressing button number 13, ISO gain, on the body of the camera, or you can just press the joystick and jog left or right until the ISO is selected on the display. Once highlighted, move the joystick up or down to increase or decrease the ISO. Remember that as a rule, you should aim to keep the ISO as far down as you can by using other exposure tools to brighten your image, including aperture or iris or f-stop. This is probably the thing you'll want to adjust most often on the fly, and to that end, the C100 has a few options. First, button number 12 on the body of the camera is the auto iris, and pressing this will automatically adjust the exposure of your picture, changing only the aperture. In general, you'll probably want to exercise a lot more control over your f-stop, and to that end, you can adjust aperture manually with the dial on top of the camera. You are now ready to shoot video, not audio. Can you record audio in this camera? You bet your bippy. Here we go. The C100 has a microphone in the body of the camera, and when you play that audio back, it sounds like you're drowning your speakers in hot tar. Look, as a rule, camera audio is junk. The only reason it's there is to provide you with a track that you can use to sync to quality production audio. But with the C100, you don't have to record bad audio in camera. The camera has 2 XLR audio ports that you can use to record to separate channels using decent microphones. Let's first address how to physically prepare the camera for audio recording. The C100 comes with this handle that mounts to the cold shoe on top of the camera. Slide the handle into the cold shoe bracket with the microphone clamp on the handle on the lens side. Lock the audio handle into place by lining the screw up with the corresponding hole in the cold shoe and gently thread the screw into place until it is hand tight. On the side of the camera, you'll see a door labeled EXT. Pull that door open and line the arrow above that port with the arrow on the wire that extends from the audio handle. Gently push the wire into the port until it clicks. When you're breaking down, remove the wire by pulling back on the metal collar and tugging it gently from the port. Notice I said gently 3 times in about 15 seconds. Gently. Gently. Once you have that set up, you're ready to run XLR into your audio ports. Line up the pins of the XLR plug with the holes in the port and gently push until it clicks into place. To remove, press in on the silver release tab and gently tug on the plug, not the cord. You can, of course, use the microphone clamp on the audio handle to hold the microphone, but this is usually a bad position to place a microphone in relation to the camera. If you do find it useful, know in advance that the clamp is a little big for most microphones. To compensate, you'll need a mic ring, some gaff tape, a latex glove, really anything that does the job while protecting the sanctity of your equipment. Activate the microphone by moving the lower switch of each corresponding channel to the external setting. If your microphone is not self-powered, you'll need to apply phantom power, which you can do by moving the center switch to the 48-volt position, which will direct that voltage through the XLR cable and into the mic. But only do this with microphones that require phantom power, otherwise you can damage the microphone. If you're not certain, start with the mic and line positions in the center switch and then check for a level. The top switch will allow you to toggle between automatic and manual gain. The dials on the top of each channel will enable you to manually set gain on each microphone, and those dials will become inaccessible once the plastic door is closed so you don't accidentally shift the gain while you're shooting. To select how you want each channel to record, open the audio submenu, which looks like an 1/8 note in front of a pressure wave, and select Audio Input. From here, you can also apply any basic microphone settings to your audio capture. For live monitoring audio options, select Audio Output. You can find the monitoring jack behind the headphones door in the back of the camera. You can also visually monitor audio on the lower right corner of the display. You'll want to adjust your gain so that the decibel input stays between -20 and -10. If your level hits 0, the sound will start clipping and your audio will very likely be unusable. Your use of in-camera tools will depend on your situation and your workflow. These are some of the more universally used tools and how to access them. First, neutral density filters. While not part of the triangle of exposure, ND filters will affect exposure in a big way. It's like putting sunglasses in front of the lens. Most lenses are threaded to allow you to attach filters to the end of the glass, but you won't need to carry around these filters with the C100 because the filters are inside the camera. To use them, locate the dial on the left of the camera that says ND filter. When you scroll up on the dial, you'll see a filter slide into frame. Keep scrolling until a filter locks into place. There are 3 filters on the C100, each of them providing 2 stops of light filtration for up to 6 stops. Once you get to 6, you can keep scrolling up to remove all 6 or scroll back down to revert to 4. The zebra function allows you to see what parts of the frame are overexposed, meaning you won't get any color information in the areas that are populated with the zebra lines other than white. You can toggle this on and off by pressing preset button number 10 labeled zebra. The magnification tool does not zoom in your picture. Rather, it punches in on the display so that you can look close at a specific area of the frame. And this can be really handy when you're shooting shallow and you want to make sure you have a hard focus on your subject. You can toggle this with button number 8, labeled Magn. If you want to unclutter your display, you can do that by toggling the display button on the back of the first-gen camera or below the display itself using button number 17 on the Mark II. And lastly, the waveform tool. If you prefer to work with scopes, there are several different scopes you can toggle on this display, and you can decide which scopes are of greatest use to you by navigating into the wrench menu and selecting WFM, meaning waveform. From there, you can select which scopes will appear when you press the waveform button, which is number 11 on the first gen and number 16 on the Mark II. And you should now be up and running. Hit any of the 3 red buttons to start and stop recording, and move the power switch to the media position to review clips that you've already recorded. And that's it. Leave a comment if you have a question. Thank you for watching. Go make great films.